Recording 31. 1.
OK, let's move on to the late 19th century, when a great deal of changes were taking place.
2.
Now, first of all, I wanted to give you some background information.
3.
So, let's have a look at some possible reasons for this.
4.
And finally, I'd like to talk about some future projects.
5.
So, what conclusions did we reach?
6.
I'll begin by explaining what this machine can do.
Recording 32.
In my talk today, I'm going to be looking at plants that have had an impact on our world and our history. Let's start with the potato. It was originally one of the staple foods of Central and South America, and when Spanish explorers traveled to the Americas, sometime in the 16th century, the potato found its way into Europe. This had several important consequences. In particular, it almost totally altered people's diet in many European countries. The potato is also believed to have been responsible for the start of a new trend, that of migrating to America. So you could say that the humble potato actually allowed many people to change their lives. However, there were also problems associated with this crop. Largely in Ireland, where the poor were very much reliant on the success of the crops. Sadly, a disease in the crop spread rapidly across the country and led to widespread potato crop failures in the mid-1800s. This meant that millions suffered from starvation as a result. Let's move on to look at another plant from the same part of the world, the tobacco plant. This originated in the Americas and had an enormous influence on the way North America developed in the 1800s. It's famed for being the original cash crop there and for funding a great deal of the development that occurred during this time. On the downside, the success of this crop resulted in a greater demand for slaves to work the crops, and this eventually led to war breaking out between the northern states and those in the south. Now, the next plant I'd like to mention is one known and used all around the world: tea. It originated in China, and in terms of its historical significance, it played a large part in the U.S. independence from Great Britain. This came about because the British government declared that the colonies had to pay a tax on the produce brought into America. It was because of the protest against these taxes that the American Revolution came about. The final plant I'll look at today is the white mulberry. Again, it originated in China and had an enormous influence on development in this part of the world, in particular in establishing trade between the East and the West. Sadly, the increase in trade brought with it the spread of disease and weapons.
Recording 33.
In today's lecture, I'm going to talk about the part that plants have played in our history, something most of us probably never give any thought to. Flowers began changing the way the world looked almost as soon as they appeared on Earth, about 130 million years ago. That's relatively recent in geologic time. If all Earth's history were compressed into an hour, flowering plants would exist for only the last 90 seconds. Without those flowering plants, it's likely we wouldn't be here. They are fundamental to our existence, forming a vital part of our food supplies. If we look further on in time, to the year 2737 BC, we arrive at the discovery of tea by a Chinese emperor when a leaf fell into a cup of hot water. This discovery eventually played a very important part in the history of China, the USA, and the UK. For Britain, when demand for tea was high, there were financial implications when a Chinese emperor declared that it could only be bought with silver, which they were then forced to find overseas. A second influential plant emerged around 202 BC in the form of the white mulberry. It became extremely sought after, and it remained so until 220 AD, because white mulberries provide food for the worm that creates silk. This luxurious material was responsible for establishing extremely valuable trade routes. And it was along these same routes that different religions made their way around the world. But unfortunately, they also caused the spread of previously unknown diseases, as well as weapons of war such as gunpowder. Finally, moving into more recent history, we come to the 16th century and the potato. It originated in Central America, but it was the Spanish who introduced it to the European diet. There, it quickly became popular because not only did it cost little to grow, but it was also a food source that was rich in vitamins. So much so that its arrival has been credited with ridding Britain of a disease known as scurvy. However, it is perhaps more famous now for the potato famines of the mid-1800s in Ireland. The Irish people were so dependent on the crop that its widespread failure over this period caused the deaths of over 1 million people and the emigration of a further 1 million to mainland Britain, Canada, and the US.